But let's start our sermon this morning with a thought exercise, okay? Let's imagine that I hand you something that you have never seen before. This thing is small enough that you can grab it with one or both of your hands. And so you turn over and examine what to you is an unknown object. Now, as you look at this object, you can see signs that the object was manufactured, right? You can see this isn't just something that occurs in nature. The object was clearly designed and assembled. Maybe you can see a screw or a piece of hardware. Maybe you can tell the object has been painted. Maybe the object's made out of plastic or some material that doesn't occur in nature. The object in your hand has clearly been designed and manufactured. Now, this object really intrigues you. You want to know more about it. So what is one of the first questions that you might ask me about this object? Well, one of the first questions that you might ask me is, what is its name, right? That's probably where you would start. It would be helpful for you to know what to call the object so you and I can have a discussion about it. So I tell you the name of the object. I tell you that you're holding a thingamajig or a sprocket or whatever we're going to call it, right? And so you try to cement that name in your mind so that we can discuss it. And then once you have the name down, you are ready to ask me a second question. What is the second question you will undoubtedly ask me about this new object? The question you will ask me is, what does it do? Once you know the object's name, what will you want to know next? You will want to know its purpose. You see, when we see design, we always assume purpose. Now, maybe it's possible the object I've given to you has no purpose. Possible the object is just a work of art. It's possible that the object was just designed to be looked at or admired by others. But even that suggests a type of purpose, right? The purpose of the object is to be admired by others. Most likely, though, the object has a definite purpose in the world. And so seeing a manufactured item, we think that someone made that item to deal with some task or some problem in the world. You know, maybe the item is meant to open jars that are stuck. Maybe it's meant to help us peel the shell off a hard-boiled egg. Maybe the object is meant to help us get the lugs off our tires when we get a flat. But seeing something that has been clearly made or created, we want to know what the purpose of that thing is. We want to know what it has been created for. What was the task or the problem that the object was meant to address? Now, with these things in mind, take a look at yourself for a moment. If you have a mirror handy, take it out. Give yourself the once over. Maybe look at yourself in the camera on your phone. As you look at yourself, what do you see? Well, science would tell you you see a collection of cosmic gases that defied all the odds and that evolved into the material state upon which you are gazing. Scientists tell us we're only here by some cosmic accident. Scientists say we have no designer. We're only here due to a highly unlikely series of random developments. Science says, look at yourself and you see the very definition of a happy accident. But look at yourself in that mirror. Look at yourself in that camera. Is that what you see? Do you see a happy accident, or do you see the outcome of a long, long series of completely random processes? Or do you see something else? Do you see something more? Do you know what the biblical figure David saw when he looked in the mirror? In case you don't know, David was the second king of Israel. He was probably the greatest king of Israel. And David wrote a lot of Israel's worship songs. These songs are found in the book of Psalms. We're studying on Wednesday nights in the Old Testament. And in Psalm 139, David looks in the mirror. And after gazing in the mirror, David has this to say about himself in Psalm 139, 13 through 14. He says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." When David looked at himself, what did he see? He saw that he had been made. He saw there was a creator that assembled him. Now, David is speaking poetically in Psalm 139. He's not necessarily making a scientific statement. But I think it is hard not to reach the same conclusion that David reached. Your body is marvelously complex. You are a feat of engineering. For example, you have a sense of sight only because complex parts of your eye all work together in perfect harmony so that you can see. If one part of your eye failed or was missing, your vision would be gone. And there is sophisticated design like that all throughout the parts of our body. It's hard to look at ourselves and think we are a happy accident. The design that we see in ourselves suggests that we have a maker. And so knowing that we have been designed, that should lead to a question. The question is, what is our purpose? What are we here for? When we see that someone manufactures something, we want to know the purpose that that something serves. What was that thing made for? And seeing that we were created, that is a question that we all must answer. If we are truly created beings, we were designed for a reason. What was that reason? We all think life feels better when we have a purpose. We all think life feels better when we get up knowing the why we're here in the morning. So why are we here? What is the purpose for which you were created? Now, this question is hardly a new question, right? Questions about human purpose have been asked for thousands and thousands of years. Literally, since men and women have been on this planet, we have been asking, why are we here? What purpose do we serve? Well, one person who famously answered this question was a man by the name of Solomon. Solomon wanted to know why we were here. Solomon wanted to know what our purpose is. And so last week, we started looking at a book of the Bible that was written by Solomon. That's the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And over the next few months, we'll be exploring this book of Ecclesiastes, Lord willing. And we are calling this exploration of Ecclesiastes, Life is Hard and Then You Die, the hope-giving message of Ecclesiastes. I know the title doesn't seem to make sense, but hopefully by the end of the series, it will. Now, if you were with us last week, then you know that Ecclesiastes is an exploration of human purpose and meaning. The book of Ecclesiastes addresses the question of why you are here. And I guess that we would expect that a religious text would have clear answers about our purpose for living, but Ecclesiastes does not. Matter of fact, last week when we started studying the book of Ecclesiastes, we saw that Solomon despaired of finding the purpose for life. And so last week we saw Solomon's conclusion about life. Life is meaningless. Solomon concluded that life is without purpose. Last week, Solomon told us that there are certain things that we can never gain from the toil and the pain and the strain of living. And Solomon said that life is meaningless because there are 4 things that all of our striving and effort can never accomplish. Right? Last week, Solomon told us that we can never escape from the monotonous routine of life. He said life requires us to do the same dull things over and over. Brush our teeth, take a shower, shave our face or legs. There's no avoiding the daily tediousness of our existence. Solomon also said we can never escape from a lack of satisfaction. As good as life can be, we're always looking for the next good thing. And all that we have or own never truly satisfies us. Third, Solomon said we can never escape from the besetting problems of life. We try to escape. We try to invent new technology to help us defeat life's challenges, but that technology can't help with emotional and psychological and relational issues. As a matter of fact, technology often deepens the pain of those issues. It's the same attempt to solve old problems in new clothes. And finally, Solomon said, with all of our effort and toil, we can never establish permanence. We cannot cheat death. All of us have to face the grave. And we cannot establish a memory of ourselves that lasts forever. The time comes when our lives will be forgotten. Even our descendants won't remember us. And so seeing those 4 human dilemmas, Solomon decides that life is meaningless. He questions if we can find any purpose for our existence. And so Solomon's teaching reminds us that life is a paradox. On the one hand, we look at our bodies and we see that we must have been designed, and that design begs the question, what are we here for? What is our purpose? Our design demands that we know the meaning. But on the other hand, our life experience suggests that there is no meaning. Life as we experience it is often random, chaotic, and absurd. And so we are stuck in monotony, never satisfied, never able to free ourselves from our problems. The only certainty we have in life is death. We thirst for meaning, but we cannot find it. Well, if you can't find meaning, what do you tend to do? If you can't find meaning, what you tend to do is manufacture it. You tend to make meaning up. The 19th century Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said that as humans, we are hardwired for meaning. In other words, having a meaning for our existence is built into our purpose and our DNA. And Kierkegaard, not necessarily a believer, also said that the universe seems not to provide us with that meaning. So what do? He said, if you're hardwired for purpose, but you don't know what your purpose is, what you do is you make it up. You manufacture it. If you require purpose but don't have any, then you have to find your own reasons for your existence. Kierkegaard would say that if you're required to have a purpose but don't have one, then life is intolerable. Kierkegaard's actually the father of what we call today modern existentialism. Existentialism says that you and I were created for meaning, but the universe doesn't seem to give us meaning. Now, in the 19th century, Kierkegaard and his existentialist buddies seemed to be revolutionary. But remember what Solomon said last week, there's nothing new under the sun. And that includes existentialism. Solomon had an existentialist understanding of the world long before Kierkegaard was born. Solomon knew that men and women, you and I, cannot live without meaning. And so Solomon knew that if you couldn't find meaning, you would have to manufacture meaning. We have to come up with a way to impose meaning on what is a seemingly meaningless universe. And so in our passage this morning, Ecclesiastes 1:12 through 2:26, Solomon tries to explore ways that you can find meaning in a meaningless world. You cannot live life without purpose. You have to have a reason to be here in order to function. And so in our passage this morning, Solomon tries to examine some ways that you could try to find meaning in life. And Solomon tests these possible life meanings to see if they will satisfy you and make you content. And so as we look at these possible meanings for our existence, see if you recognize what you think is the meaning for your life, and see what Solomon has to say about your reason for living. And so open in your Bibles or Bible apps to Ecclesiastes chapter 1 if you haven't already. And we are going to start reading at verse 12, ending at verse 15 for now. And inspired by the Holy Spirit, this is what Solomon writes in Ecclesiastes 1:12 through 15. He says, I, teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. Now, remember what I said last week. Last week, we said the opening and closing parts of Ecclesiastes were written by an editor, but the bulk of the book was written by Solomon. Solomon was the third king of Israel. He was one of the wisest men who ever lived. And here in Ecclesiastes 1:12 through 15, Solomon lays out this dilemma that we're talking about this morning. Now, verse 12, Solomon identifies by himself by his position, right? He says that he was king. And as a king, Solomon had the job to lead and to shepherd his people well. And so wanting to be a good king, Solomon says, I studied life. And as he studied life, what he came to realize is that life is a burden, right? In verse 13, Solomon says God had laid a burden on humanity. And what is that burden? The burden is the dilemma we started our sermon with. We all work, we toil hard, looking for meaning and purpose in our lives, but we don't find any. Our search for meaning seems impossible because there's so much to our existence that is meaningless and disordered. And so to understand what Solomon's talking about here, you have to think about the metaphor that he uses in verse 14. Solomon says that life is like chasing after the wind. Have you ever tried to chase after or capture the wind? I guess if you're on a sailboat, right, you might talk about catching the wind, but that's not what Solomon means here. Here, Solomon is like talking about catching the wind in your hand, for example. Solomon is talking about, just reaching out and grabbing the wind and drawing it in. Now, wind is a physical reality, right? It's oxygen molecules moving from place to place. There are a lot of physical things that we can grab, but wind isn't one of them. Why can't you grab the wind? Well, grabbing the wind involves an unassailable paradox. What is wind? It is air that is in motion. What is involved in capturing something? To capture something, you have to keep it in one place. You can't capture the wind. Why? Because the minute it stays in one place, it isn't wind any longer. Movement is essential to wind's identity. Capturing the wind is by definition an impossible endeavor. And Solomon is saying that finding meaning is an impossible endeavor. While we were designed to have meaning, life doesn't give us meaning. It's that existentialist dilemma of Kierkegaard. So if we can't find meaning, what do we have to do? We have to manufacture it. We have to create it. And that's what Solomon does in the rest of our passage this morning. He tries to manufacture meaning to give his life fulfillment. Maybe if the universe won't give Solomon what he wants, he can find it himself. And so look at verse 16. Solomon writes, I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. What Solomon saying in verse 16? He says, I'm a sharp guy. I know more than most people I know. If anybody can find a reason for living in a meaningless universe, it's me. Solomon says, I've experienced a lot of life. I have the smarts and the riches to explore a lot of different ways of living. And so Solomon says, I can figure it out. I can find the meaning and purpose for my life. Well, spoiler alert, close your ears if you don't want to know how the sermon ends. I'll whisper the outcome. It doesn't go well, okay? Before Solomon even tells us where he tries to find purpose, he tells us the outcome. Look at verses 17 through 18 of Ecclesiastes 1. Solomon writes, "Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief." Solomon says, I ended up right back where I started, right? Verse 14, I was chasing the wind. Verse 17, I'm still chasing the wind. And verse 18, Solomon says, my experiment made me more unhappy than I had ever been. The more I learned about life, the more sorrow and grief I had. The more I learned there's no easy solution to our search for meaning and contentment. And so even before he starts, Solomon tells us his attempt to find meaning would be a huge flop. And so we all suffer from this dilemma. We sense there has to be a meaning to life, but we can't figure out that meaning. We know we have to have a purpose, but we're not sure how we're living that purpose out. And so inside of us, we have this dissatisfaction, this frustration, this void that is created. We try to find the meaning that will silence the craving and the yearnings. We try to find those things that will distract us from the meaninglessness of life. And so Solomon explored three different ways to find purpose in the world that seemingly offers none. First, Solomon chased pleasure. Solomon went after the best physical sensations and emotional satisfactions that life had to offer. And if anyone was equipped to chase pleasure, it was Solomon. There are two qualities that made Solomon a great candidate for chasing pleasure. First of all, Solomon was rich. I just recently saw a list of the 20th richest people of all time. Solomon was actually on that list. The list estimated that today Solomon would have a net worth of $2 trillion at the peak of his wealth. That's a lot of money. Now, the Bible doesn't really tell us how much money Solomon has, but it does tell us that Solomon was incredibly wealthy. 2 Chronicles 9:27 says that Solomon made silver as common as pebbles in Jerusalem. It was as easy to pick up silver in Jerusalem as it was a little pebble off the street. Pleasures cost money, but Solomon had no shortage of cash. He was able to buy whatever experience his heart wanted. And then in addition to being rich, Solomon was also likely very good looking. Now, we don't often get physical descriptions of people in the Bible, but we do get physical descriptions of both of Solomon's parents. The Bible tells us that both David and Bathsheba were incredibly good looking people. And since they were so stunningly beautiful, we might sort of just have the implication that they didn't create an ugly baby. Most likely, Solomon would have topped People's Magazine list of the world's most beautiful on several occasions. He had all the money and charm to get whatever he wanted. And so Solomon chased pleasure hard. Look at Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11. Solomon writes, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Solomon lived a pretty hedonistic lifestyle here, didn't he? Look at all the things he pursued to gain pleasure and happiness. In verse 2, he pursued laughter and comedy. He had the best entertainment and jesters. Verse 3, Solomon went after wine and drink. He got a good buzz on to try to enjoy life. Verses 4 through 6, Solomon denied himself no luxury goods. He had the best right at his fingertips. Italian suits, French wines, German cars, it all belonged to him. Verses 7 through 8, Solomon accumulated wealth. He had more goods than he needed and money to buy even more stuff if he wanted. Verse 8, Solomon talks again about entertainment. He had the top singers available to give concerts at his palace at any time. And finally, again in verse 8, Solomon had plenty of sex. He had beautiful women at his beck and call anytime he wanted. Solomon was living the life. Verse 10 says he never denied himself any pleasure. He decided that his life would be all about enjoyment and good times. And can we be honest this morning? Many of us here this morning, we read Ecclesiastes 2 and we think that's the life. We think if we could live that way, we would be happy. We're sure that with unlimited entertainment, booze, luxury goods, and sex, that would be just the thing that we need to be content. Now, I know you can't admit to thinking that. I mean, you're in church, right? So in church, you have to say, well, no, none of that interests me, you know? And hopefully as Christians, we might have a different view of life than the people around us. But our culture would grab Solomon's life anytime. And today, many people live just like Solomon did, only without the wealth. Maybe they pursue pleasure and experience, pleasure after pleasure and experience after experience. I mean, sure, people work, they do daily toil, but why do they do it? So they can enjoy life, right? People work to go to the bars and the nightclubs. They work so they can buy vacation homes and luxury goods. They work so that they have the means to get the swipes on Tinder, right? Many people have made it their purpose here to enjoy life. And so we think if we could only enjoy life like Solomon, we would be happy. If we could hit the lottery and not deny ourselves any pleasure, we would be content. But what does Solomon say about all these experiences? Look at verse 11. He writes, "Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained after the sun." Solomon says, I was still chasing the wind. Remember what that's about. You know, when you chase the wind, it's a fruitless endeavor. That's what pursuing pleasure was like. And after a while, Solomon says, even the enjoyments of pleasure became stale. Do you remember what Solomon wrote last week in Ecclesiastes 1:8? He says, all things are wearisome more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. No pleasure or satisfaction can ever fill us up. Pleasure and satisfaction don't function well as a life purpose. We get bored. We get tired, even of great pleasures. Nothing holds our attention forever. And so not finding purpose in pleasure, Solomon moved on to a second pursuit. Look at verses 12 through 14 of chapter 2. Solomon writes, then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what he has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in darkness. So Solomon, he takes a pretty radical turn here, right? Now, rather than pursuing pleasure, Solomon decides to pursue a life of good character. He decides to be a person whose life demonstrates right and wrong. And so in verse 12, Solomon says, I decided to pursue wisdom. Here, wisdom represents wise living. It represents living with good character. It's contrasted with folly in these verses. The meaning of folly is moral foolishness. And so I can sort of picture it in my head. I think one morning Solomon woke up hungover with a strange woman in his bed, and he thought to himself, I can't live like this anymore. There have to be rules. There have to be morals. I've got to find those rules, and I'm going to become a good person. Now, we can't ignore verse 13. Solomon says that there is an advantage in having wisdom and good character, because wisdom and good character give you an insight into the world that lets you see your life path a little more clearly. You can definitely avoid problems by knowing right and wrong. Still, when Solomon decided to live like a good person, he made a surprising discovery. He discovered that living well doesn't always necessarily bring you a good outcome in life. All of you old folks like me all know Billy Joel, right? The singer Billy Joel. And you all know that Billy Joel famously sang a song entitled Only the Good Die Young. Well, it's not true that only the good die young, but it is true that sometimes the good die young, right? And sometimes the evil and immoral live to verse 90. So look at what Solomon writes in verses 14 through 16, starting the second half of 14. Solomon says, but I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both, the wise and the fool. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. And so Solomon tried to be good, but he found out his goodness didn't exempt him from the trials of life, right? And I think sometimes we think that if we only live a good life, then no trouble will ever befall us, right? There are plenty of TV preachers today who will tell you if you're a good Christian, you will have a life blessed with health and wealth. But Solomon found something else to be true. Solomon found that good Christians get cancer. He found that good Christians get COVID. He found that good Christians are on airplanes that go down and crash. Solomon decided that being a good person did not protect him from the meaninglessness of the universe. It didn't remove the absurdity of life. And so Solomon said, I'm going to try one other purpose for life. Having tried the pursuit of pleasure, having tried the pursuit of character, Solomon now tried the pursuit of a legacy. Solomon decided he was going to build a life that would be a blessing to others. Solomon decided he was going to live life for his children and his grandchildren so he could have something to pass along to them. Look at Ecclesiastes 2, 17 through 23. Solomon writes, so I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things that I had toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil into which I have poured all my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. So here again, Solomon talks about working hard, right? He talks about putting your nose to the grindstone. And what's the point of doing that? Well, Solomon said he did this to pass a legacy on to the generations that come behind, right? Verse 21, Solomon speaks of leaving what he has to another. You can't take your wealth with you, right? We know the Pharisees in Egypt tried that, right? They built those huge pyramids we see overseas so that they could put all their wealth in with them so it could travel on to the next life. But thousands of years when archaeologists went into the pyramids, what did they find? All the wealth of the pharaohs was still there. Hadn't gone on to the next life. Money isn't eternal. You can't send it on to heaven. But you can pass it on to future generations. But Solomon says even building that type of legacy is meaningless. Why? Because you have no control over what people are going to do with your money when you're gone. People could waste it. They could use it frivolously after you worked so hard for it. Plus, Solomon says the building of wealth often leads to anxiety. In verse 23, Solomon says at night, the minds of rich people don't rest because they're worried about their wealth. We might think the rich have it easier, but Solomon says, no, not always. The rich have to worry about their investments. Is somebody trying to steal from them? Solomon says wealth can be a blessing, but it comes with great burdens. And so do you recognize yourself in any of Solomon's portraits? Solomon addresses three ways that we often deal with the meaningless world in which we live. And maybe you're using one of his strategies because you see, without God, we're in a tough situation. We long for meaning, we long for purpose. But without God, the world doesn't give us any meaning or purpose. And so we have to manufacture that meaning for himself. And so we chase after entertainment and vacations and luxuries and sex and booze so that we can numb the meaningless. But pleasure can't hold back that absurdity of life. Others of us try to find the meaning in being a good person, but we get bitter when the good that we do doesn't seem to reward us. Others of us think, well, we'll just build a legacy for our kids and our grandkids. But once those kids and grandkids come along, we don't know what they've done with what we've given them, and they can waste it. Now, Solomon tells us the only way that you can have meaning is to bring God into the picture. Again, several times this week, we saw Solomon use the phrase under the sun. And remember what we said last week, Solomon locates the meaninglessness of life under the sun. And several times throughout these chapters, Solomon talked about under the sun. And we said last week, under the sun refers to a situation without God. It refers to an earthly, not a heavenly reality. Many people these days live with a godless reality. We call it materialism. It's a belief that there's nothing spiritual, nothing except that which we can taste, touch, or see. If we live with that view of the world, we will never find meaning. Why? Because the things that we live for will always disappoint us. You're thinking, so far, this has been one bummer of a sermon. We just talked about all these things that you can't find meaning from. Is there no hope? Are we condemned to be without purpose in this world? Well, Ecclesiastes 2:24-26, those are the verses where Solomon tells us where enjoyment and satisfaction come from. The key to find meaning in life is to live for God and to honor God. Look at Ecclesiastes 2:24-26. These verses say a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What does Solomon say about how to find the purpose for your life? Look at verse 25 again. Solomon writes there, without God, who can eat or find enjoyment? Solomon says the purpose of life can only come from God. That same point is found in verse 24. He says their purpose in life is a gift from God. Without God, there is no meaning or enjoyment. You can't manufacture it. You can't make it. You can't find it through your own strength or your striving or your effort. Meaning and satisfaction are a great gift graciously given by God in a crazy upside down world. And so if you want to have meaning, if you want to have the satisfaction, you can only find those things in God. You can never find meaning on your own. Now, Solomon says something very honest here. He says that finding God does not solve all of your problems. Because one of the teachings of Ecclesiastes is that this world that we live in is broken. Our planet is messed up. Life is monotonous. There are problems that we cannot fix. Death is an ever-present specter. Knowing God doesn't take all those issues away, but knowing God lets you find a little joy and purpose in the chaos. Knowing God gives you a purpose and direction in the midst of seeming meaninglessness and hopelessness. And so as you look at yourself this morning, hopefully you can see that you are created. And you were created for purpose and meaning. You can look everywhere in this material world to find your purpose and meaning, but under the sun, you won't find it. Like the 17th century scientist Blaise Pascal explains it, he says, there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man, which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ. And Solomon is pointing us to that very same truth. Meaning in life can only be found with God through faith in Jesus Christ. If you're not a Christian, make it your purpose to know Jesus. Read the Gospels. See if he's the one from beyond the sun whose actions and teachings can give meaning to your life. Consider the claims that Jesus made about himself so that you can respond in faith and obedience, that you can confess Jesus as your Lord and believe that God raised Jesus from the dead. And if you are a Christian, heed Jesus' words in Matthew 6:33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Jesus' words there are about purpose. Don't live for things that don't satisfy. As a Christian, be thankful for every blessing that God has given to you in this otherwise meaningless world. Now I'm going to make you a promise. My promise is that was the most dense sermon from Ecclesiastes that we're going to have, okay? That was a heavy one. I get it, all right? The others are going to be a little bit better as we go along, a little bit easier to digest and understand. So don't grow discouraged. But do know, why are some of us hurting inside? Why are some of us struggling? Why are some of us wrestling through things? Because we're trying to find meaning in that which does not satisfy. We're looking to things that are under the sun to give us our purpose and our hope. You're not going to find it in those things. You're only going to find it in Jesus Christ and the relationship with God that he gives you. And so seek him first and above all things.